Gotta get you're in.
We are recording now. Anyway, welcome. Welcome, Maxine. Introduce our
There you go.
guest, who you know.
Yeah. Hi. Well, this is the Many Shades of Green Zoom version, and basically our tagline is hashtag Raise Your Eco Consciousness, and we're kind of living through really crazy times now, times that none of us have ever been through, and so with that, in the crazy world we're living in, we ask people to mask up, we ask people to vote, we ask people to consider other people, and hopefully we'll get through all this craziness. So with that, we have an incredibly wonderful guest, Monica Weiss. She taught in the New York City public school system for many years, and she always interjected some environmental curriculum. Even then, I mean, it's starting to get more now, but I know she'll explain what how she got some of the kids into learning from curriculum that connects to nature. And then she retired, and after that, after a year of that, she got into she connected with 350 NYC, which is the New York chapter of 350.org, which is a national organization, which will explain what the 350 is. I'll have Monica do that. And that was on Planet Day in 2011. And then she says, quote, "The rest is history." So Monica, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
And we're so happy to have your humanness and expertise, on our little Zoom version here. How you doing today?
Great, really well, thank you.
Yeah, even though we got some crazy weather here in New York, a little bit
We
of
do, we have rain, but I always try to put a positive spin on that. We need water, and everything that grows needs water. So, rainy days have their place. We can't have sunshine every day.
But
That's
just
true.
an adjunct to that,
Mhm.
but the rain becomes wasted because we don't have any system or reservoirs that we could, keep the rain for days that it doesn't rain. The rain goes down, you get flooding, then it goes into the sewer system, and then it floods. There are other countries that are building dams that will catch the rainwater. But anyway, aside from that, what I wanted to know from it as a school teacher, how did you first get interested in ecology or environment? What motivated you to take that interest?
Well, I think everybody has a personal story, right? And how we make our connections to nature is very much the same in some ways and unique in other ways. And I think I just got sort of an ethic and a consciousness, an appreciation for nature from my parents, both of my parents. And I think just childhood experiences, gardening and traveling and summering at the beach. My father was an avid swimmer. And growing up, he had never actually seen the beach. He grew up in Austria, so he loved the mountains, he hiked, and he loved lakes. But once he discovered beaches here in New York, and we lived, New York City, we just spent summers on the beaches and hiking locally in Harriman and other places, skiing. So I think there was a certain appreciation of nature growing up, which I think translated into my teaching sensibilities too, that I felt children are so thirsty for these experiences, and they're so curious. They're so curious about everything that it's sort of a perfect time to introduce children to the natural world.
Yeah, we're great.
Yeah, well, well, Malcolm and I grew up. Well, I grew up on Ocean Parkway, not far, like blocks from the beach.
Mhm.
So my childhood was on the beach, Bay 6, that the big kids took care of the little kids. There was no formal anything. You turned 13, you were taking care of the younger ones. That's how it went for summers on end. And I could never understand why my parents' friends would go to the bungalow colonies up in the Catskills when we had this amazing ocean right in the summer right here, so it was and my mom loved the beach, my parents, so it was great to be in that environment and to enjoy it as well.
Yeah, I have a similar background. I grew up in Coney Island, and
Right,
I
so you're
was
right near.
and by Seagate, so I was right by Yeah, it was a block away
Right
from the
there.
beach, which was good and bad
Mhm.
for me, because when I wanted to go to camp, my mother would say, "What are you going to camp for? Go to the
Right.
beach,"
Right.
which was true.
Yeah.
That was true. But so, and teaching these kids, you said you had some literature you used to like. Is there any books you can recommend for people with children who are listening who might want to read them some of these stories?
There's so much wonderful literature now, and there's so much more than there was. I'm retired for about 8 years now. So I had sort of my favorite repertoire, but children's literature in general is very, very rich in messaging. And the messages are usually universal themes of kindness, generosity, care, empathy. These are messages. We should all be reading children's books, actually.
Hmm.
But some of my favorites were, and they're still popular. Lynn Cherry, who's a real environmentalist herself and an author, wrote a book called The Great Kapok Tree, which is the story of someone who's about to chop down a kapok tree in the rainforest. And he gets very sleepy, falls asleep under the tree. And as he's sleeping, he seems to be having a dream, but the animals are speaking to him. All of the animals that inhabit the rainforest
Wow.
come to visit him in his dream. And they explain the importance of the trees and the interconnectedness of the animals and the plants in the rainforest. And the message he's left with at the end of his sleep is that what you do today will affect what happens tomorrow. So this book might have been written 25, 30 years ago, but it's almost more relevant today than it was then. She also has a website, Lynn Cherry, and she has videos for children and resources for parents and teachers, which is great now that everybody's stuck at home. There's a wealth of resources on her website.
Great.
Of course, the Lorax was
Yeah.
the big one, the big
Yep,
one.
yep.
And, that message is more important than ever. And ironically, I just read The Overstory recently, Richard Powers. And to me, that was sort of the prelude to the Overstory was Dr. Seuss's The Lorax. What are we doing to the trees? There's an important message there.
Well,
And the
also
giving tree.
in the message, if I can interrupt on the Lorax,
Mhm.
the one of the characters are the Onslers, which want to get rid of the trees, and he has to have his family involved because they know that they will take down the trees and make money, and that's more important than anything else. So within that book, that great book with
Mhm.
all that great information, things that they're putting out in it.
Mhm.
The Onslers always captured my attention for some reason because I was so upset how bad they were. And
Yes,
I didn't
yeah,
want them to be bad. I wanted them to be good. So,
yeah.
that's
Well,
it.
interestingly, they sort of represent the corporate interest, right? I mean,
Yes.
a thing only has value in terms of what it can be sold for. And actually, in the Overstory, Richard Power talks about that too. The value of what you make from the tree should be equal or greater, right?
Right.
And that's the message. The message is, where is the value? And now we know that trees are invaluable. Without them, we don't breathe.
Right.
Right.
When did you get involved with or realize the endangerment of what's happening with the environment? Knocking down the trees, the air.
Yeah.
When did you become involved and become, in the environmental cause?
Well, when I graduated from college, from Queens College in 1976, I had a degree in early childhood education because I'm sort of a person who appreciates beginnings. So I focused on young children. And for my master's, I got a master's in environmental education because that was always something that was of interest to me. So we're going back to 1978 is when I really began my education about the environment in a serious way. And I remember the first book we ever read in my first class was Silent Spring, Rachel Carson. And I could cry today, that book was, it was just extraordinary. It was tragic. It was sad. And who knew that we would still be talking about this today, So there was a lot of really profound literature out there, and here we are. But when I retired 8 years ago is when I really got involved with 350 NYC. And, this is what they say, Act 2 in life is when you retire, what do you do with the next 20 years? And clearly this is what I'm going to be doing with the rest of my life.
Could you
Yeah.
tell us about the organization?
I just want to, can I just
Okay.
get back to one thing
Sure.
with the kids? I just don't want to drop the kid. I mean, I just want to get one thing on the earthday.org. They launched a global campaign aimed at ensuring that all students receive quality, wide-ranging climate education in schools across all grade levels and disciplines.
Mhm.
And this, they say, is crucial. And the United Nations Climate Summit in 2021 wants to make climate change and climate literacy a core feature of the curriculum across the globe, which is huge, actually.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, there's there's a lot of different groups. There's one in particular, the Children's Environmental Literacy Foundation, SELF,
Mhm.
and they've been working for at least almost a decade, I think, on curriculum in the New
Mhm.
York area, and they're branching out. They have a Houston branch now, but that goes to the point of the importance of this, and it goes to the point also of how 350 is working to try to bring youth in, correct, Monica?
Yes, actually, so the youth climate strike organizations and individuals are a powerhouse of intellect, energy, and perhaps this is a good segue into that. In terms of climate education, if we think about the mission of education, it's to prepare people for a future life somehow, right? How to live in the world in a way that's appropriate and thoughtful and meaningful, and which ties in a little bit with my interest in divestment and 350.org. There's a big divestment movement that 350.org sponsored for right from the start, more than 10 years ago. And when I retired, I began to think about, pensions and where they come from and what they're invested in. And the reality is that most pensions are invested in fossil fuels, or were until very recently. So it seemed very natural to try to engage the teachers' retirement system in divesting from funds that were basically destroying the planet. It was very antithetical to the work that teachers do. Teachers invest in the future. Teachers help children prepare for a future, and for us to be receiving pensions from funds that are destroying their future and undermining it seemed really hypocritical. So I think anybody who's somewhat thoughtful understands the connection between it's antithetical to education, and subsequently there's a huge divestment movement on college campuses across the country and around the world. But that's a whole different topic.
Well,
Right.
as they keep on repeating in all these shows, the future is now. When they said that
Yes.
that the environment and the global warming, they originally projected to 2050. But if you look at the United States today, the forest fires in California, around where I live in California, they burned over 4 million acres.
Right.
The hurricanes that are happening now in the East Coast, they're running out of numbers. They're running out of letters. I think we just had
That's right.
Zeta, and it was the 8th hurricane that hit
We're
Louisiana this year.
feeling Zeta right here,
Oh, are you?
actually.
That's what
Yeah,
this
we're
rain is.
getting some of the remnants from it.
But
That's
again,
what's happening out my window.
it was
So,
because the kids think, oh, in 20, 30 years, aside from the fact it's happening now. But just a story, I remember seeing the opening of 2001, A Space Odyssey. I don't know if you guys have seen that, but I saw an opening. I think it opened in 68, 69. And I said, wow, what's going to happen in the year 2000? Now we're 2020. So
Yeah.
before you turn around, it's going to be here. And the problem is, if we don't save the planet now, it might be too late.
yeah, that's
Clearly.
the unfortunate
That's where I'm
truth.
coming from right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's where I
That's why
start.
these youth leaders are so important. Greta is the most, widely recognized at this point, but there's
Mhm.
some really amazing young women who I know you had on the drawdown event last year at the Ethical Center.
Yes. Yeah.
We had was Jamie Margolin there, and
Yes, she was.
Alexandra
Yep.
Villasenor, and they represent I don't know, was Zaya Bastida there? I don't
Yeah,
remember.
yes, she was there, and she opened our drawdown event this year. We had her video at the start of the drawdown event.
Right, and these are remarkable young women. Can you give us a little on one or two of them that you, having met them and spoken to them, what
Yeah.
they're about?
Well, um, so last year was the big youth climate strike globally. There was about 400,000 people in New York City. And prior to that September 24th strike, March, Greta arrived in New York City, as you know, to much fanfare. And since June of that year, there was an enormous amount of planning and organizing going on in New York City. And some of it was assisted and supported by 350.org. But most of the work and the initiative and the ideas were done by New York City high school students. And we basically gave them space at the New York Society for Ethical Culture to have twice a week meetings, organizing meetings. And as I watched these young people who had never done anything like this before, never, they became major activist organizing leaders. It was extraordinary. And they literally gave up their entire summers. They worked 7 days a week, 10 hours a day on this. And they pulled off the most extraordinarily successful march, I think, in the history of New York. We've never seen anything like that. And Fridays for Future is Greta's organization. We had a young lady here in New York City, Alexandria Villaseñor, who was also in our recent event,
Right.
who was inspired by Greta's striking. And she decided she would do the same thing here in New York City. And she sat in front of the UN for 12 months through rain and shine and snow and sleet and icy cold weather with a little sign, just like Greta had, School Strike for Climate. And she gained a lot of attention, as Greta did. So there was sort of a parallel story occurring here in New York City. She was one of the leaders, and Shea Bastida, who is a Mexican immigrant with her family who came here following floods in Mexico, also a New York City high school student, and is absolutely a climate rock star on her own at this point. All very eloquent, thoughtful, intelligent young people who understand. And when I say young, many of them are under 18 years of age, or were at the time. Some of them are in college this year, but they understand better than anyone that their futures have been compromised in a very, very serious way. And they're angry and they're scared and they're hopeful at the same time. And we have organizations like the Sunrise Organization and 0 Hour, which is Jamie Margolin's org. Alexandria has gone on to start a nonprofit called Earth Uprising, whose mission is specifically to mandate climate education in schools at every level, starting, I guess, in kindergarten. So they understand that they have power. They've taken the power. They're making sure that we hear them. And their motto was last year, we vote next. And this, I think, has scared leaders into thinking about what they're doing and how they're doing it. So it's been phenomenal to see this kind of leadership emerging. And it reminds me very much of the movement during Vietnam when I came of age, where people who were barely able to vote, that's what got us the vote at the age of 18, right?
Yeah.
We could pick up a gun and fight a war and kill people, but we couldn't vote. So I think there's a parallel to that movement where young people understand how serious this is and that they have to step in and make a difference.
Is there a central website or something that people listening to the show can go to find out about the various organizations or how they could partake in them or become a volunteer?
Well, there are many. You can Google youthclimatestrike.org. There's still Fridays for Future, which is Greta's organization. I think she was recently given $1 million to help support groups that are providing solutions to climate change. There's Earth Uprising, which is Alexandria's organization. There's the Sunrise Movement, which is sort of college age, and they're focused more on policy and politics. And there's 0 Hour, which is more of a junior high, high school age range. So I think wherever people can engage, they should, because being part of a group really gives you more power than just acting as an individual.
What we're now getting a little into politics. How did it affect the movement that the U.S. dropped out of the Paris Accord, and we're the only country that did?
Devastating. They were devastated. I mean, incredulous, really, like most of us were, just incredulous. You know, they feel abandoned by our leadership or lack of it. And they understand the science. You know, this is where the incredulity comes from. They understand the science and they understand what's at stake. And it is incomprehensible that people in positions of leadership and power can be so stupid and insensitive.
Is there a
Well-
country that's taken over the leadership at all? You know, France or England? Is there anybody that's spearheading this?
Well, the
like we
countries
should.
that are still in, and
All of them
frank-
except us.
right,
I-
right.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is that cities and states, governors and mayors have
Mhm.
taken up the slack. As soon as Trump pulled out of the Paris Agreement, mayors recommitted and doubled down and to meeting, you know, the United States commitments, and governors did, and entrepreneurs did, and business people did.
And
So
small towns too, because
Yes.
my town, we signed on. I mean, you know, we're gonna do everything we can to put whatever is in the Paris Accord agreement and get the CO2 down and work to do that as much as possible. I mean, I can understand when the kids get upset about what's going on with the lack of leadership. Just yesterday, Trump got the protections for the Alaska's Tongass forest, which is the lungs, pretty much, of the country. And it's when you use the word incredulous, that was I was like went through the roof, you know, when I read it, and I just know these kids see this happening and they need to stop it, and they're gonna hopefully the ones who can vote are voting. I mean, you know, the kids get scared, kids get angry, but then there's hope, which sounds just like me for next week. You know, it's
Yeah,
like
but by
I'm
the way,
scared, I'm angry,
Yeah.
I have anxiety levels through the roof, but I'm trying to be hopeful. I'm trying to find that there's enough people that will make their voices heard, you know, and get this all done.
This show is being recorded the week before the election. We're now at I think the 28th of October, Thursday, and the election is
yeah.
November 2nd, Tuesday.
No, no, it's November
November 3rd.
3rd,
Excuse me. Yeah.
Right.
and today's the 29th.
Oh,
It's okay, Malcolm. You must have election anxiety.
no, I
It's
think
like
I have.
Groundhog Day in the pandemic, you know, it's the same day every day anyway.
Yeah, it's like we call the days of the week blur days. Today is blur day.
I think I had that mental fog possibly because of the COVID.
Yeah,
Mhm.
it's
Okay.
there's some sort of fog going through on all of this.
Mhm.
So anyway, so what in terms of links, or I mean, I also know that you work with Drawdown, obviously. I know you met two amazing people who we had Keith on, but we,
Mhm.
you know, and Ellie, who also has been part of the show.
Mhm.
So in terms of where they're at right now, they had this big event. What's the next thing for them on Drawdown? Do you know?
Drawdown is having some sort of a conference in January. And there'll be more information to come about that, but it's a 5-day conference. They have a partnership with another organization, and they will be highlighting the science behind climate change as well as the solutions, which is really, really important. It's going to be a very
Science.
high-level conference. Yeah,
Science. Here's the thing.
science. Yeah,
I
I
know.
mean,
Is that
it's what
still
we
going
teach in
to
school.
Is that going to continue despite the COVID-19?
It's going to be virtual. It's going to be virtual.
Okay.
Absolutely, yeah. Everything's virtual, but it's extraordinary what you could do virtually.
Well-
Nothing has stopped, right? The movement is still strong. And look at the kind of election engagement we've had, you know, with postcard writing and phone calls and texting. I mean, nobody's going door to door, but the impact has been huge. So Let's not underestimate this Zoom that we can't stand anymore.
Well, this
Yeah,
is
I
our
know.
show. We're Zooming it.
Yeah, exactly. So we're making it happen
It's
anyway.
a wave of the future.
Yeah.
Or it is, it's not even a wave of the future. The future is now.
It's here. It is. It
It's
is.
here. Well, the
Yep.
time is now, or whatever you want to
Yeah.
say. Although I still like my brother's famous words, nothing makes sense and plenty of it. I always have to throw that into the show.
The world
That's
is,
Mitch. He had his thumb on society pretty early on when he realized nothing makes sense and plenty of it. But we're
Mhm.
trying to make sense of how we can help the environment. We're trying to make sense of all the great people who are doing wonderful things, and to get their message out, and collectively, it's always the collective will that's gonna get through, and that's what we need to focus on. So that's very.
Can I give a
very-
shout out to the climate clock? Do we have time for that?
yeah,
Sure,
definitely.
sure. Yeah,
Okay,
what
great.
you sent me the climate clock stuff. So yeah, shout out.
I did. There are these two amazing, what we call artivists, artist activists, Gan
Artivists.
Galan and Andrew Boyd. And they have been working for over a year with a team, technology team and others, to create a climate clock similar to something that Greta called for, a clock that would be going backwards, kind of like not like the nuclear clock to see how close we are to midnight, but this climate clock measures our carbon budget, what's left, what we can burn before we exceed the 1.5 degrees Celsius. And they created this extraordinary art installation, and it debuted the day before Climate Week, I guess the 20th or the 19th of September, 1 Union Square. And it's there. It's a metronome clock. It's on the side of the building. It's still there. Hopefully it will be up forever. And the goal is to use this to have these clocks in every city around the world, in every city in the United States and around the world, so that everyone can focus on the urgency of this, how much time is left. We have just over 7 years, according to our carbon budget, to transition off fossil fuels and begin drawing down.
Wow.
So within the next 7+ years, we need to have resolved the energy system in a way that does not require us to burn fossil fuels. So the clock is terrific. You can go on climateclock.world to see what they're working on. It's phenomenal, and it's a movement. And what they say is that the clock is showing us a deadline, which if we act in time, we can turn into a lifeline. And that's
How
where the
about if we
solutions
don't
come
act
in.
on time? What will happen?
Well, we
Oh,
don't, that's another show.
yeah. It's something you might see in science fiction movies. Things
Exactly.
burning up everywhere.
But by the way,
Yeah.
before I came across this poem called "Pity the Nation" by Ferlinghetti, by Lawrence Ferlinghetti. So if you, it's pity the nations whose people are sheep and whose shepherds mislead them. Pity the nations whose leaders are liars, whose sages are silenced, and whose bigots haunt the airways. Pity the nation that raises not its voice except to praise conquerors and acclaim the bully as hero, and aims to rule the world by force and by torture. Pity the nation that knows no other language but its own, and no other culture but its own. Pity the nations whose breath is money, and who sleeps the sleep of the too well fed. Pity the nation, pity the nation who allows their rights to erode and their freedoms to be washed away. My country, tears of thee, sweet land of liberty. I thought that was so apropos
Very apt, very, yeah.
for today's
Essentially,
Sadly so.
And I think that was
But-
written in
but
the
I'll-
60s by one of the first beat poets.
Yeah.
I
yeah.
have a quick quote though from Lady Bird Johnson about the environment. So I'm going to just do it quickly now because I know we're getting near close. She said, "The environment, after all, is where we all meet, where we all have a mutual interest, and therefore," I'm having phone issues. Why is my phone? Sorry. I'm going to start again. "The environment, after all, is where we all meet, where we all have a mutual interest. It is one thing that all of us share. It is not only a mirror of ourselves, but a focusing lens on what we can become."
Yeah.
That's what she wrote. And that's what she said. And she was so very right. So
Yes, it was
had to throw that in there, minus the
beautiful.
interruption.
Beautiful.
But anyway,
Well, anyway, guys, I think those two things, wrap up our show for today. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, and keep up the good work.
And I'll let your friends know. I'll send you the link to the show.
Great.
And
right.
again, thank you. And again, thank you for your work.
My
Yeah,
pleasure.
thanks, Monica. We're gonna have you back on, and for people, they can go also to is it 350.org or 350
350nyc.org.
350nyc.org.
And
Go to that web and check out what they're doing, and get to work, people.
yeah. And again,
to work.
we're Zoomcast, so if you think there's some people that you'd like to have on the show and you could be on the show, we could have, 4 or 5, 10 screens. The miracle of the modern age. In the meantime,
Great.
make sure you vote.
Vote.
And
Mask up and vote.
And stay safe. Bye.
Stay safe. Okay, bye.
Bye-bye.